Okay, so you want to own a combat sports company. Buy the arena, sign the fighters, watch the money pour in from ticket sales and pay-per-view. Simple enough idea, right? Here is what that actually looks like from the inside. First, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying a sports team. The NFL owns franchises, buildings, stadiums, 53-man rosters on full salaries. The NBA locks its players into collective bargaining agreements where athletes take home roughly 48 to 51 cents of every dollar the league generates. That is how traditional professional sports works. You own the team, you pay the people, you split the revenue. A combat sports promotion is something entirely different. You do not permanently employ the fighters. You do not own a stadium. You do not maintain a roster with guaranteed salaries. What you own is a brand, a set of championship titles, a broadcast pipeline, and the right to package human competition into sellable entertainment. That is it. On paper, it sounds lighter than air. In practice, it is one of the most brutally complex and financially treacherous businesses in sports. The cheapest version of a combat sports promotion is a regional operation. A few events a year in local arenas, a handful of fighters nobody outside your city has heard of, and a live stream that maybe a few thousand people watch. To do that at a basic professional level, you are looking at somewhere between $150,000 and $350,000 in your first year just to exist. That covers your promoter's license from the State Athletic Commission, the surety bond the commission requires before they will let you hold an event, the ringside medical staff, doctors and EMTs you are legally required to have at every single event, your referee and judges, basic production, venue rental, and fighter pay. And that gets you a regional show that generates almost no media value and almost no revenue. If you want to operate at the level where you can actually attract television distribution, where your events look professional on camera, where you can sign fighters who have a real fan following, you need to be spending somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million per year on operations. That is the mid-tier. You are doing 6 to 8 events a year, you have a professional production crew, and you have managed to get your fights onto a regional streaming service. You are still losing money. To operate at a national level, the kind of promotion that can compete for serious broadcast deals, sign genuinely elite fighters, and stage events in major arenas, the capital requirement jumps to north of $10 million in your first year. And that is before you have signed a single high-profile name, before you have staged a single major event, and before you have generated a single dollar of meaningful television revenue. Now, none of this includes the hidden costs that nobody explains to you when you are sitting in a room deciding whether to do this. The sanctioning fees to the State Athletic Commission for every event, the drug testing protocols that cost thousands per card, the specialized insurance policies covering fighter injuries that can run to tens of thousands of dollars per event, the legal overhead to draft compliant fighter contracts, navigate state regulations that vary by jurisdiction, and keep up with evolving federal interest in the space. And you have not paid anyone to fight yet. Let us walk through what a single major event actually costs, because this is where most people's mental model of this business completely falls apart. You need a venue. A mid-sized arena in a major American city runs from $50,000 to $250,000 per night in rental fees, depending on the market, the day of the week, and how much leverage you have negotiating. You need a full broadcast production team. Camera operators, broadcast trucks, satellite feeds, a commentary setup, replay systems, lighting rigs specialized for combat sports. That alone runs from $150,000 to $500,000 for a standard professional card. For a major pay-per-view event, that number goes higher. Then there is security, which is not optional. Ringside medical staff, ambulance on standby, again required by the Athletic Commission, travel and hotel for fighters and their corner teams, travel for your own production staff. A marketing budget that actually drove people to buy tickets in the first place. Add it all up, and a baseline professional pay-per-view event for a major organization runs roughly $2 million in production costs before you count fighter pay. Now here is where it gets interesting. In September of 2024, the UFC held its first event at the Las Vegas Sphere. A fight card called Noche UFC, officially branded as Riyadh Season Noche UFC because of a Saudi Arabian title sponsorship deal. The production cost for that single event exceeded $20 million. That is 10 times the standard cost of a major pay-per-view. The event drew 16,024 people and generated a gate of $22 million, the highest live gate in UFC history, breaking the previous record of $17.7 million from a card at Madison Square Garden in 2016. It also set the record for highest grossing single event ever held at the Sphere. That is what it looks like when a promotion operating at the absolute pinnacle of the industry spends everything it has on a single night to prove what is possible. The event essentially broke even on gate revenue alone before pay-per-view receipts. And they had a sovereign state helping to cover the bill. Every fighter on your card gets paid. What they get paid is more complicated than it sounds, and it is the single most controversial topic in the entire business. The basic structure works like this. A fighter gets a guaranteed show purse, money they receive simply for showing up and making weight. They get a win bonus on top of that if they win, typically equal to their show purse. Headliners and established stars negotiate additional terms. Revenue sharing on pay-per-view purchases above a certain threshold, which can add hundreds of thousands of dollars to their payout on a blockbuster card. There are also performance bonuses handed out at the discretion of the promotion for things like knockouts and submissions, typically ranging from $50,000 to $100,000 each. Entry-level fighters on a major roster might earn as little as $12,000 to show and $12,000 if they win, a total of $24,000 for a professional fight in the most prominent organization in the world. Established veterans can earn hundreds of thousands. Champions on major pay-per-view cards can earn into the millions when you count all the components together. Now here is the structural problem. In the NFL and the NBA, the players collectively receive close to half of all league revenue. In combat sports, the numbers look dramatically different. Legal filings from the antitrust lawsuit known as Lev versus Zuffa, a decade-long class action brought by over 1,000 former UFC fighters, allege that the UFC retained more than 80% of all revenue generated by its events while paying fighters a fraction of what they would have earned in a competitive market. The lawsuit alleged that the UFC used anti-competitive contracts to trap fighters in deals they could not escape from, which artificially suppressed wages across the industry. The settlement reached in early 2025 was $375 million, paid by TKO Group, the UFC's parent company, to the fighters involved. A second lawsuit covering fighters from 2017 onward is still making its way through the courts. The legal and financial risk tied to fighter compensation practices is not a footnote in this business. It is a live structural threat that any operator in this space carries on their books. If you are buying into the cost described above, you need to understand exactly how the revenue works, because the structure is nothing like what most people assume. The first revenue stream is the live gate, ticket sales. A sold-out arena feels like winning, but ticket revenue alone rarely covers the cost of a major event. UFC 300 in April 2024 generated a gate of about $16.5 million at a price point of $79.99 per pay-per-view buy, on top of requiring an ESPN Plus subscription. UFC 300 sold 615,000 pay-per-view buys. A card with a weaker headliner, like UFC 301 a few weeks later in Rio de Janeiro, sold 67,000 buys. The same organization, weeks apart, with a gate difference that tells you everything about how dependent this business is on star power at the top of the card. The second revenue stream, and historically the biggest driver of profit for major events, is pay-per-view. When a card does 600,000 buys at $80 a purchase, that is around $48 million in gross pay-per-view revenue. But the promotion does not keep all of that. Distribution platforms, whether a cable provider or a streaming service, typically take somewhere between 45 and 50% of the gross. That leaves the promotion with roughly $24 to $26 million in net pay-per-view revenue from that single card, out of which they still need to fund fighter bonuses and any contractual PPV point obligations to the headliners. But here is something that just changed the entire model. In August 2025, the UFC signed a 7-year, $7.7 billion media rights deal with Paramount, the largest in UFC history. The deal has an average annual value of $1.1 billion and gives Paramount exclusive distribution of all 13 major numbered events and 30 fight nights per year starting in 2026. Critically, as part of the agreement, the promotion is moving away from the pay-per-view model entirely. Events will now be available at no additional cost to Paramount Plus subscribers. What that means for the revenue model is significant. The unpredictable spike and valley pay-per-view economy gets replaced with a guaranteed billion-a-year floor. No more 67,000 buy disasters dragging down quarterly results. No more dependence on a single star to drive the card. $1 billion a year, contractually guaranteed, regardless of what happens inside the cage on any given night. That is what a media rights agreement does for a combat sports promotion at scale. It converts volatile event-by-event revenue into something that looks more like a subscription business. and it is the single biggest reason the major players in this space are worth what they are worth. If you are finding this breakdown valuable, consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It genuinely helps more people find content like this. Before we get to sponsorship, there is another revenue layer worth understanding because it operates almost entirely on margin with almost no ongoing operational cost. Combat sports promotions sell merchandise, and not just to people who attend the events. A fighter's walkout shirt sold online globally the week of a major fight generates revenue with almost no variable cost beyond the manufacturing deal already in place. Championship replica belts sell for several $100s each. Branded training gloves, apparel lines, collectible cards, and signed memorabilia all move through the promotional ecosystem. The UFC's licensing deal with EA Sports for the UFC video game franchise, the fourth installment of which sold millions of copies, generates royalty income that requires almost no ongoing involvement from the promotion itself. This is the power of licensing. You own a brand, you hand the brand to a manufacturing and distribution partner, and you collect a percentage of every sale they make. The partner takes on inventory risk, shipping logistics, and customer service. You collect a royalty check. At scale, this becomes a meaningful income stream that compounds brand value at the same time it generates cash. Fans buy this merchandise not primarily because they need a t-shirt. They buy it as membership in a community, as a signal to everyone around them about who they are and what they care about. That emotional purchase behavior is what makes brand licensing so durable. As long as the fights keep happening and the sport keeps growing, the merchandise revenue grows alongside it. Beyond ticket sales and broadcast rights, every visible surface at a combat sports event is for sale. And we mean every surface. The canvas on the mat or the floor of the cage carries logos. The fence around the cage carries logos. The corner pads carry logos. The walkout apparel fighters wear carries logos. The graphic overlays on the broadcast carry logos. The instant replay that appears on screen between rounds carries a sponsor's name. The broadcast commentary mentions official partners. The entire event can be sold to a title sponsor, as happened with UFC 306, which was formally branded as Riyadh Season Noche UFC under an agreement with Saudi Arabia's General Entertainment Authority. The sponsorship categories are diverse. Energy drink brands have been enormous in this space. Monster Energy has been an official UFC partner for years. Sports betting platforms have become a major revenue source as that industry has opened up across American states. Tourism boards from countries across the Middle East and Asia now regularly pay to have their branding associated with major events. Automotive brands, apparel companies, and financial services firms all operate in this space. And then there is the fighter outfitting deal, a mechanism where the promotion signs a single agreement with an official apparel partner, currently Venom for the UFC, and all fighters are required to wear that gear. Fighters receive a tiered payment based on their status within the organization. The promotion captures the entirety of the apparel sponsorship value, rather than letting individual fighters negotiate their own shirt deals. This was a significant and controversial shift from the earlier era when fighters wore custom sponsor patches on their shorts. All of this sponsorship revenue sits on top of media rights and gate receipts. At scale, a major promotion is running 3 separate income engines simultaneously. This is where the economics get genuinely interesting, and where the gap between running a regional promotion and running a global one becomes almost impossible to bridge. Governments and tourism authorities in certain countries will pay combat sports promotions significant guaranteed fees simply to host events within their borders. The mechanism works because a major UFC event generates tourism, hotel bookings, media coverage, and global television reach that a country's General Entertainment Authority wants to be associated with. The UFC receives an estimated $25 million to host a pay-per-view in Abu Dhabi and approximately $20 million for a fight night in Saudi Arabia. These are guaranteed fees paid before a single ticket is sold, before a single pay-per-view buy is registered. The promotion walks in with a guaranteed floor on the event's profitability. That changes the financial calculus of international expansion entirely. Rather than taking the risk of staging events in new markets and hoping the local audience shows up, UFC receives cash upfront from the destination country that more than covers baseline operational costs. The gate revenue, the broadcast fees, and the pay-per-view income are all profit on top of that guaranteed foundation. No regional or mid-tier promotion can access this model. It requires a global brand powerful enough that governments view hosting your event as a tourism strategy. That brand took decades and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment to build, and it is the clearest illustration of why the gap between the market leaders and everyone else in this space is not just large, it is nearly structural. Let us talk about what happens when a smart, experienced operator gets everything right in theory and still ends up in catastrophe. The Ultimate Fighter was a reality television show that first aired on Spike TV in January of 2005. Two teams of fighters competed in a house for the chance at a UFC contract. The show cost almost nothing to produce by television standards, and it changed everything. Before the show, UFC was a company that had burned through its founders' money, been banned in dozens of American states, and nearly died. Dana White and the Fertitta brothers, Frank and Lorenzo, had bought it in 2001 for $2 million when nobody else wanted it. They spent years losing money. Then The Ultimate Fighter debuted, drew over 4 million viewers in its first season, and the live finale that ended it sold out in less than a minute. UFC went from a business nobody believed in to the fastest growing sport in America almost overnight. By 2016, the Fertitta brothers sold the UFC to a consortium led by the talent agency WME-IMG for $4 billion. That is a return of roughly 2,000 times their original investment over 15 years. No conventional sports franchise sale in American history has produced a comparable multiple, but here is what that story actually teaches you about this business. The Fertittas were not primarily fight promoters. They were casino operators who understood entertainment, hospitality, and how to build a loyal customer base inside a controlled environment. They treated the UFC like a media business and a brand-building exercise, not a fight promotion. The fighters were the product. The television contract was the distribution channel. The pay-per-view was the monetization mechanism. They hired the right people, White as the front-facing evangelist, and they funded the losses for years before the business started printing money. Most people who try to enter combat sports promotion have the identity inverted. They love the fights. They love the fighters. They think running events is the core of the business. It is not. Packaging fights for distribution and building a loyal audience that comes back repeatedly is the core of the business. The fights are just the raw material. Now for the part that no one who wants to do this wants to hear, your main event fighter gets hurt. Not a minor injury. A torn ligament diagnosed by a doctor 7 days before the card. The headliner is off the event. You have already spent the $2 million in production costs. You have already paid the venue. The marketing budget is gone. The pay-per-view by projections, let us say you were expecting 400,000 buys on the strength of that headliner. Collapse. You rebook with a replacement fighter who draws a fraction of the original interest. You end up doing 150,000 buys instead. Your projected net pay-per-view revenue drops from roughly $20 million to around $7 million. You cannot get the $2 million in cost back. The shortfall on pay-per-view revenue is not recoverable, and the fighters who were lower on the card, whose exposure depended on that headliner bringing viewers to the broadcast, quietly note that the card underperformed, which affects their future commercial value. This is not a hypothetical. In June 2024, UFC 303 was scheduled to be headlined by Conor McGregor, one of the biggest pay-per-view draws in the sport's history. McGregor withdrew. The card still took place, headlined by Alex Pereira, and sold 274,000 buys. With McGregor on that card, industry observers expected it to push past 1 million buys. The difference between those two outcomes, at $80 a buy with a 50% distributor split, is around $29 million in net promotional revenue that simply did not materialize. Then there is the legal risk. The antitrust litigation described earlier, the Le versus Zuffa case, was filed in 2014 and did not reach final settlement until February 2025. Over a decade of litigation, $375 million in settlement payments, and a second case, the Johnson versus Zuffa lawsuit covering fighters from 2017 onward, is still in active litigation. The legal exposure from how fighters are contracted and compensated is not a closed chapter in this industry. It is ongoing, and there are scandal risks. A high-profile fighter tests positive for a banned substance days before a major card. A personal conduct incident becomes front-page news. A broadcast partner expresses concern. Sponsors begin asking questions. None of these individual events necessarily destroys a promotion, but any one of them can turn a profitable quarter into a damaging one. The market structure of combat sports is extreme. A small number of companies control almost everything. The UFC dominates mixed martial arts. WWE, now merged into TKO Group alongside the UFC, dominates professional wrestling entertainment. Bellator was acquired by the PFL. One championship operates a substantial international business. Everyone else is fighting for scraps. TKO Group Holdings reported full-year 2025 revenues of $4.7 billion, with the UFC segment generating $1.5 billion and the WWE segment generating $1.7 billion. The company generated over $1.5 billion in adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization across the full year. That financial position creates a wall that smaller promotions simply cannot scale. When a regional promotion develops a talented fighter with genuine commercial potential, what happens? TKO looks at that fighter, offers a contract that pays more than the regional promotion can match, and signs them. The regional promotion's best asset is gone. Their brand narrative is disrupted. And the investment they made in developing that fighter benefits someone else. The UFC uses several legal mechanisms to hold fighters in place once signed. The Champions Clause extends a fighter's contract automatically upon winning a title, preventing a champion from testing the open market. Right of first refusal clauses allow the promotion to match any competing offer from a rival promotion during a specified window. These provisions were central to the antitrust allegations in the Le versus Zuffa case, where a federal judge noted that contract provisions could become effectively perpetual, leaving fighters trapped. For a new entrant trying to compete at a national level, the combination of brand loyalty, legal contract leverage, and capital depth held by the major players creates a competitive environment close to a wall than a ladder. Let us put actual numbers around what owning a mid-tier national promotion looks like, because this is where the math either works or it does not. The optimistic scenario looks like this. You are running 8 events a year. 4 of them are standard fight nights distributed via a streaming deal worth roughly $12 million annually in rights fees. $3 million per event on average. 4 of them are pay-per-view cards averaging 300,000 buys at $80 a buy, with a 50% distributor split, leaving you with roughly $12 million in net pay-per-view revenue per card. Your sponsorship revenue across the year comes to $4 million. Your total annual revenue is around $64 million. Total production costs for 8 events, $2 million each, run $16 million. Fighter pay across all cards, estimating conservatively at 30% of total revenue, runs around $19 million. Administrative, legal, and overhead costs add another $6 million. Your net operating profit in the best year is around $23 million. That is the best year. Now here is the realistic year. 2 of your 4 pay-per-view cards suffer main event injuries or withdrawals. Your average buys on those 2 cards drop to 125,000 instead of 300,000. Your net pay-per-view revenue for those cards falls from $24 million combined to around $10 million combined, a shortfall of $14 million. Production costs on those 2 cards are still $4 million. Your net operating profit in this scenario falls to somewhere around $9 million. The difference between a good year and a bad year is $14 million. And in a business where you need years of consistency to justify the capital required to even get to the national level, that kind of volatility is genuinely dangerous. The closing reality of this business is this. At the regional and mid-tier level, it is a demanding, low-margin operation that most operators exit within 5 years. At the global level, with media rights guaranteed at $1 billion a year, sovereign site fees guaranteeing event profitability before a punch is thrown, and brand equity that governments compete to be associated with, it is one of the most defensible and profitable businesses in sports entertainment. The distance between those 2 versions of the same business is not a matter of degree. It is a structural chasm built on decades of investment, legal leverage, and brand development. The companies at the top did not get there by promoting fights. They got there by building something that other people would always need access to more than they needed access to them. If you decide to enter this business, just remember what you are actually building. Not a fight promotion, a distribution network for human drama. And the ones who own the distribution are always, in the end, the ones who win. Before you go, if you want to go deeper on exactly how these businesses are built and run, I've put together a detailed business guide that breaks down the full economics with even more depth. You can find it linked in the description and pinned in the first comment below. And if you got value from this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. It makes a genuine difference. Thank you for watching.